Obese girl's garden was trampled by jealous neighbors. Mountain man's saved her dream harvest. The summer of 1817 arrived in the Green River Valley not with a gentle caress, but with a dry, baking heat that turned the Utah clay into a puzzle of cracked earth. For Beatrice, however, the heat was the least of her burdens. At 20 years old, Beatrice was a woman of substantial size. In a frontier society that often equated leanness with hard work and heaviness with gluttony, she was a walking target for scorn. Her size, however, was not born of greed. Orphaned young and taken in by her Aunt Agatha, Beatrice had been raised on a diet of cheap lard, stale biscuits, and cornmeal mush, the kind of heavy, nutrient-poor filler that swells the body without nourishing the blood. While Agatha's own children received the cuts of venison and the fresh milk, Beatrice was given the scraps that stuck to the ribs and refused to leave. The inevitable expulsion had happened 2 weeks prior. "You're eating us out of house and home, girl," Agatha had screeched, pointing a bony finger at the door. "You're big enough to pull a plow, so go find your own patch of dirt. I'm done carrying you." It was a lie, of course. Beatrice worked harder than any mule, scrubbing floors until her knees bled and hauling water until her shoulders screamed. But the cruelty of the frontier had hardened Agatha's heart, and Beatrice was the easiest weight to shed. Beatrice had left with nothing but a small sack of heirloom seeds she had secretly saved from her grandmother's old tin box pumpkin, sweet corn, and a rare variety of red tomato, and a determination that burned brighter than the midday sun. She found a small, unclaimed patch of land near a bend in the Green River. It was rocky, overgrown with sagebrush, and unwanted by the serious homesteaders. But to Beatrice, it was a kingdom. For 14 days, she waged war against the earth. Every morning, before the sun crested the red rock cliffs, Beatrice was awake. She had no plow, so she used a sharpened stick and a rusted spade she had found abandoned near a trapper's trail. She dug until her hands were blistered raw, then wrapped them in rags and dug some more. She hauled buckets of water from the river, the yoke cutting into her soft shoulders, her heavy frame sweating profusely in the high-altitude air. She created a miracle out of dust. She mixed the river mud with cow manure she collected from the trails of passing cattle drives, using her bare hands to work the fertilizer into the soil. She spoke to the seeds as she placed them in the ground. "You will be sweet," she whispered to the corn. "You will be strong," she told the pumpkins. "You will save me," she prayed to the tomatoes. By mid-July, the garden was no longer a dream. It was a lush, vibrant oasis in a landscape of beige and brown. The pumpkin vines were thick as ropes, crawling aggressively over the cleared earth, bearing fruit that swelled visibly by the day. The corn stalks stood waist-high, rustling like a green choir in the wind. It was the most beautiful thing Beatrice had ever owned, because it was the only thing she had ever owned. But beauty, in a desperate land, attracts two things: admiration and envy. And in the Green River Valley, envy was a poison that spread faster than blight. Half a mile downriver lived the Miller family. Silas Miller was a man of sour disposition and bad luck, a farmer who blamed the soil, the weather, and God for his failures, never looking at his own lack of patience. His wife, Martha, was sharp-tongued and bitter, and their 3 sons were carbon copies of their father, idle hands with cruel minds. The Millers had a large plot of land, flat and arguably better than Beatrice's rocky patch. Yet their corn was yellow and stunted, and their vegetable patch was choked with weeds. They farmed with anger, not love. When Silas Miller rode past Beatrice's cabin, a lean-to shanty she had constructed from driftwood and mud, and saw the explosion of green life bursting from her garden, he didn't feel inspired. He felt humiliated. "Look at that!" Silas spat one evening at the dinner table, slamming his spoon into a bowl of watery gruel. "That big sow down the river, she's got pumpkins the size of boulders, corn green as emeralds." "Probably stole the seeds," Martha sneered, tearing at a piece of dry bread. "Or she's got some dark magic. A woman that size, it ain't natural she can bend over to weed without toppling." The sons snickered, their eyes gleaming with a malicious idea. "It ain't right," Silas continued, his face reddening. "We've been here 3 years, breaking our backs. She comes in, waddles around, and makes us look like fools. If she takes those vegetables to the trading post next month, everyone will laugh at the Millers." The decision wasn't made with a formal plan, but with a shared silent understanding of petty cruelty. They wouldn't steal the food that would be criminal, and Silas considered himself a law-abiding man. No, they would just teach her a lesson. They would put the natural order back in place. The attack came on a Tuesday night, under the cover of a new moon. Beatrice was asleep in her lean-to, exhausted from a day of weeding. She didn't hear the soft thud of boots on the soft earth. She didn't hear the cruel whispers. The Millers descended like locusts. They didn't just trample, they dismantled. Silas used a heavy walking stick to smash the young pumpkins, laughing softly as they burst with a wet crunch. The sons ran through the corn rows, snapping the stalks at the base, leaving them to lie flat like fallen soldiers. They uprooted the tomato plants, tossing them into the dry scrub where the roots would wither by morning. "Fat pig's garden," one of the sons hissed, stomping a squash into paste, "only fit for slop." They left as quickly as they came, leaving behind a battlefield of destruction. When Beatrice stepped out the next morning, carrying her water buckets, she dropped them. The water splashed over her bare feet, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt a tearing sensation in her chest, physical and agonizing. Her green oasis was gone. In its place was a muddy, trampled graveyard. The smell of crushed vegetation, usually a scent of harvest, smelled sharp and acrid, like spilled blood. Beatrice walked into the center of the ruin. She fell to her knees in the mud. She picked up a crushed pumpkin, the size of a fist, its orange skin split open. She tried to press the pieces back together, her hands shaking uncontrollably, as if sheer will could heal the vegetable. "No," she whimpered. "Please, no!" The tears came then, hot and blinding. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just curled into a ball in the center of her destroyed dream, the mud soaking into her simple dress, and wept with the total crushing despair of a woman who realizes the world does not want her to survive. High up on the ridge overlooking the valley, a pair of eyes watched. Gideon was a man of the high country. At 35, he was a relic of an era that was already fading. He was a wolf hunter, a trapper, and a man who preferred the company of the wind to the chatter of townsfolk. He was immense, 6 feet 4 inches of corded muscle and scar tissue, bearded like an Old Testament prophet, clad in buckskins that smelled of pine smoke and cured leather. He was known in the territory as the Ghost of the Green. He moved with a silence that defied his size. He had been tracking a cattle-killing cougar when he heard the weeping. It was a sound that cut through the morning bird song, a low, keening wail of pure heartbreak. Gideon moved down the slope, his moccasins making no sound on the scree. He paused at the tree line, hidden by the shadows of the ponderosa pines, and looked down at the scene. He saw the woman Beatrice. He knew of her, though they had never spoken. He saw the devastation. Gideon was a man of few words, but he was a man of sharp observation. He read the ground like a book. He saw the boot prints heavy, clumsy boots, not moccasins. He saw the distinct heel mark that he had seen before outside the Miller homestead. He saw the pointless cruelty of it. A bear destroys a garden to eat. A storm destroys a garden because it is nature. Only men destroy a garden just to see it die. Gideon felt a cold anger ignite in his gut. He hated bullies. He hated waste. And looking at the woman, sobbing over a broken pumpkin, he felt a strange tug in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He waited until Beatrice, exhausted and defeated, retreated into her lean-to. That evening, Beatrice resolved to leave. She packed her few belongings. What was the point, she thought. Aunt Agatha was right. I am nothing. I take up space, and the world wants to flatten me. She decided she would sleep one last night, and in the morning she would walk to the settlement and beg for work washing linens. But as the moon rose, Gideon descended. He didn't knock on her door. He didn't offer platitudes. Instead, he went to work. Gideon was not a farmer, but he was an engineer of the wilderness. He surveyed the perimeter of the garden. The Millers would be back. Bullies always returned to gloat or to kick the victim while they were down. He took a shovel from his pack, a military entrenching tool. Quietly, rhythmically, he began to dig. He didn't dig a garden bed, he dug a moat. About 10 feet out from the garden's edge, he carved a trench 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide. Then he went to the riverbank. He harvested buckets of thick, cloying river slime, the kind of slick gray mud that acted like grease. He coated the bottom and sides of the trench with it. Next came the thorns. Gideon moved into the brush, cutting long, vicious strips of wild hawthorn and blackberry brambles. He wove them into a low, invisible fence right at the lip of the trench. Finally, he set the noise traps. He used thin tripwires made of gut, strung between the trees, attached to piles of dried gourds and tin cups he had scavenged. They wouldn't hurt anyone, but they would raise the dead. He worked all night, a silent shadow moving with terrifying efficiency. By dawn, he had vanished into the trees. When Beatrice woke up, she walked out to say goodbye to her garden. She stopped. She saw the trench. She saw the strange fortifications. She looked around, bewildered. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. The wind rustled the sagebrush. No one answered. But for the first time in 24 hours, she didn't feel alone. She saw a single, large pumpkin one that had survived because it was hidden under a broad leaf placed prominently on a stump near her door. Next to it was a small pile of fresh venison jerky. Beatrice didn't leave that day. She waited. The second night came. The air was thick, the crickets loud. Beatrice sat inside her lean-to, clutching the handle of her spade, her heart hammering against her ribs. Gideon was up in a towering oak tree 30 yards away. He had a clear view. He sat motionless, a heavy unlit torch in one hand, a flint striker in the other. Around midnight, they came. The Millers were drunk on corn, whiskey, and malice. Silas led the way, stumbling slightly. "Gonna make sure we got every last root," Silas bragged to his sons. Gonna salt the earth tonight, boys. Make sure nothing grows here but misery. They approached the garden from the east, confident and loud. Quiet, Pa, one son whispered. You'll wake the sow. Let her wake, Silas laughed. Let her watch. He took a running step toward the garden patch, intending to stomp on what he thought was flat ground. Snap! The tripwire caught Silas's ankle. A cascade of tin cups and dried gourds rattled with the volume of a crashing wagon. What in the startled? Silas lurched forward. His sons, reacting to the noise, rushed to steady him. They all hit the perimeter at the same time. They didn't see the trench. Silas stepped into empty air. He plummeted 3 feet down, his boots hitting the slick river slime. His feet slid out from under him as if he were on ice. He went down hard, face first into the muck. Help! He gurgled, his mouth full of mud. His sons tried to stop, but the momentum carried them. The first son grabbed a branch to steady himself, but it was the hawthorn barrier Gideon had woven. Thorns the size of sewing needles pierced his palms. He shrieked, let go, and tumbled into the pit on top of his father. The second and third sons tripped over their brothers, falling into the chaotic tangle of limbs, mud, and cursing men. It was a scene of absolute slapstick humiliation. The trench wasn't deep enough to kill, but it was deep enough to trap. Every time they tried to stand, the greased mud sent them sprawling back down. They were covered in slime, stinging from scratches, and panicked by the darkness. It's a trap! Silas screamed, flailing. She's got a demon! Then the light came. A sudden, roaring whoosh illuminated the clearing. Beatrice stepped out of her cabin, eyes wide. She looked up. Standing on a large rock overlooking the trench was a giant. Gideon had struck his torch. The flames cast long, dancing shadows across his stoic face. He looked like a vengeance spirit carved from granite. He held the torch high, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The firelight revealed the millers in all their pathetic glory, grown men rolling in mud like pigs, defeated by a hole in the ground. Gideon lowered the torch slightly, illuminating his own face. He stared directly at Silas. The look was not of rage, but of profound disappointment. It was a look that said, "Is this the measure of your manhood? Destroying a woman's food?" Silas froze. He knew who this was. Everyone knew the wolf hunter. Gideon, Silas stammered, wiping muck from his eyes. Gideon jumped down from the rock. The earth seemed to shake when he landed. He walked to the edge of the trench. He extended the torch, letting the heat brush near their faces, then pointed a massive finger toward the river, then toward their home. Go, Gideon rumbled. His voice was like grinding stones. And do not look back. The millers scrambled out of the trench, slipping and sliding, their dignity left entirely in the bottom of the pit. They ran into the darkness, the sounds of their wet boots squelching, fading into the night. Beatrice stood by her door, the spade falling from her hand. Gideon turned to her. He extinguished the torch in the dirt. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. They won't come back, Gideon said softly. You, Beatrice started, tears welling up again, but these were different tears. You did this? A garden is a promise, Gideon said, looking at the ruined plants. They broke a promise. I don't like oath breakers. The next morning, the rebuilding began. But this time, Beatrice was not alone. Gideon didn't just leave. He set up a camp nearby. He didn't say, I'm staying to help. He simply started working. He brought supplies from his own cache, seeds he had traded for with the Ute tribes. hardy varieties accustomed to the harsh winters. "The soil is still good," Gideon said, examining the earth. "The roots of the corn are deep. Some will recover. The rest we replant." "We?" Beatrice asked, holding a cup of coffee she had made for him. Gideon looked at her, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Two backs are stronger than one, and I have a craving for pumpkin pie come autumn." For the next 2 months, the valley witnessed a transformation. Gideon taught Beatrice the three sisters method he had learned from the natives planting corn, beans, and squash together so they supported one another. He showed her how to dig irrigation channels that fed directly from the river, saving her the back-breaking labor of hauling buckets. Beatrice, in turn, taught Gideon softness. She cooked for him stews made with wild herbs and the few vegetables they salvaged. She showed him that a home wasn't just a shelter from the rain. It was a place of warmth. The dynamic was peculiar to the outside eye. The massive, bearded mountain man and the heavy, soft-spoken woman. But as they worked, a rhythm developed. Beatrice stopped hiding her body under shapeless sacks. She saw the way Gideon looked at her, not with the scorn of the townspeople who saw only too much, but with the respect of a man who saw strength. He watched her lift heavy stones. He watched her gentleness with the seedlings. The harvest that autumn was not just a success, it was a legend. The replanted crops, fed by the new irrigation and protected by Gideon's vigilance, grew with a ferocity that defied logic. The pumpkins were monstrous golden-orange orbs. The corn was sweet and tall. When market day arrived in the settlement, Gideon hitched his mule to a cart they had built together. They loaded it high. As they rolled into town, heads turned. The obese girl and the wolf hunter. Whispers fluttered like birds. But when they lowered the tailgate, the whispers stopped. The produce was undeniably superior. Silas Miller was there, selling his meager, worm-eaten potatoes.